The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
You are comfortably zoned with the Zigzag Man in Alameda, California, pushing on the doors of life marked pull and fighting the unholy trinity as we go. Big business, organized religion, and government.
Hello there, everybody. This is Alan Blumkin on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm here with David Nemic, my usual co-host on these programs. And today we're going to be discussing the all-time team for the years of 1901 through 1910, the first half of the Dead Ball era. Last time we did this, we discussed the entire 19th century as one entity, but at this time we feel it's better to break it down decade by decade through the 20th century. So welcome, David.
Well, great to be with you again, Al.
Okay, same here. Okay, I guess we're starting from 1901 to 1910, and let's start with catcher.
Oh, maybe we should give a little background first.
Okay, go ahead.
The 1901 season was the first. 1900 season was an 8 teams existed in the National League. And that was the extent of the major leagues. In 1901, the American League declared itself a major league, much to the National League's dismay. And the National League, poo-pooed it and didn't think it could possibly produce a comparable product to the one they were putting out there for fans. But they were soon proven wrong when American League teams robbed them blind of some very, very good players, including, people like Ed Delahanty. Right away, Nap Lajoie hopped over, Jimmy Collins. The American League in 1901 was a very strong league, and they had some of the players we're going to be talking about during our time together here today.
Well, wasn't that basically because the National League owners were extremely cheap and have been they're lowballing the players for years? I'm specifically thinking about the guy who ran the Boston team and the guy, I don't know if that was still Soden at that point.
It was, and the
Rogers who ran the Phillies.
Yeah. Most of the owners were used to being tight-fisted. John Brush, we can certainly throw in there. Andrew Friedman, who owned the Giants. These guys were used to getting their way, and players, unless they were really major stars, like Delahanty and Keeler, McGraw, they were pretty much given the minimum and like it or lump it, because there were good players in the minor leagues ready to take their place at the drop of a hat. But in 1901, the American League, they were ready to pay pretty big salaries for the times. And as a result, they took over the contracts of several players whom we're going to be talking about, who were major figures in the first decade of the 20th century. We're starting with catcher. Now, here is one position where it's very, very tough, if you're going to form an all-star team, to decide who you're going to put behind the plate. Roger Bresnahan, who supposedly developed shin guards, or he was the first to use them, which isn't altogether true, is in the Hall of Fame at present. He is the only catcher who really spent most of his career as a catcher in the first decade of the 20th century who was in the Hall of Fame. And he was by no means the best catcher. At times he was, but overall we're going to probably go with a guy whom I'm afraid most people have never heard of, and maybe never even heard mention of. I would vote for Johnny Kling, who caught for the. They began the 20th century as the Orphans. They were soon renamed the Cubs after they acquired manager Frank Salee. And Salee really put together a very, very strong team, but his health forced him to leave the Cubs, and he died soon thereafter of pulmonary ailments. But Kling is not in the Hall of Fame. Nobody's ever mentioned him for the Hall of Fame. But I think overall, for the 10-year period, between 1901 and 1910. I would go with Kling.
Because he took off 1909?
1909 hurt. It didn't really make a difference as far as the Hall of Fame went. It made a difference as far as his career stats went. I don't think there were any catchers in the decade of the first decade who made 1,000 hits while they were catching. As many as
well, you have,
Kling came the
two
closest.
that come to mind who really couldn't hit were Lou Krieger and who basically Cy Young's catcher, and Billy Sullivan, senior, who was the one who was catching for the White Sox. But obviously, as far as I know, neither of them could hit a lick.
Well, they couldn't hit. They couldn't hit the beginning of the 20th century, and then the dead ball era came into prominence, and they suffered even more. But Al is making a very good point. Catching at that point was a position that demanded good defense and a good arm. Managers could go. They didn't care if he hit 140. There was a guy who caught for Brooklyn, Bill Bergen, who his average was often under 150, and then he finished his career with an average well below 200.
I think it was something like 170.
His defense was so good that Brooklyn was willing to keep him and play him.
Yeah,
and he had a lengthy career as a result of it.
I remember
he would be made for Bergen as perhaps the top catcher.
I remember when I discovered him in the original Tuck and Thompson Encyclopedia. I couldn't believe that such a guy could last that long as he did.
Yeah, until you look at comparable averages for catchers, I know it's almost impossible to imagine. But one guy who's forgotten, who came into the 20th century as perhaps the best catcher and the best hitting catcher, was Ed McFarland. He in the latter part of the 1890s, I would have to say he was the best catcher in the majors. Best overall catcher, and that he could hit. He was a good fielder. He kept his head in the game. But something happened to him soon after he jumped to the American League and joined the White Sox. And he had a couple good years in the American League, but by the mid part of the decade, Billy Sullivan, a weaker hitter, had taken over as the Chicago catcher. So the catching position was thin as far as Hall of Fame material goes. In fact, it's even questionable, I think, whether Bresnahan should be in the Hall of Fame. In another position that was extremely thin in the first decade of the 20th century, and had been extremely thin in the latter half of the 1890s, was improbably enough first base. You have to scramble a bit to come up with who the top first baseman was, and you can almost divide it. You could go with two guys, I think. In the American League, I would say Harry Davis of the Philadelphia Athletics, who won 4 straight home run crowns. Actually, he tied for a couple of them, but he was the first to win 4 straight in Major League history. And he played on pennant winners, a good overall player, had some speed, lasted a long time. I think he was a top first baseman in the beginning of the 20th century, first decade.
Over Frank Chance.
Dan McGann, a switch hitter, who played primarily with the Giants during the decade, was also a very good first baseman. They would be my top two. What about you, LD?
Over Frank Chance? And I'm just going with reputation. My knowledge of this isn't nearly as deep as yours. But
Well,
Frank Chance
was
is the first one I learned about.
Yeah, Frank Chance is an excellent candidate because Chance had something that Davis and McGann didn't have. He was also the manager of the player manager of the Cubs, so he had a lot in his mind when he took the field. And on his mind, it's sort of a tragic story because Chance was probably beamed more than any other player, perhaps even in Major League history. And by the end of the decade, was suffering terrible headaches. Really was struggling to be a full-time player anymore. Continued to be a good manager, but his career was cut short, tragically short, in my estimation. He did go on to manage the Yankees for a while and continued in baseball until nearly the end of his life, but he died relatively young, and I think the beatings were a heavy contributor to it.
Well, I didn't know that.
He's an unfortunate case. But Al's hit on who I would regard as the number 3 first baseman in the decade. So I would go. McGann was a switch hitter, also died very young, a suicide. I believe it was in 1909, and Davis lasted out the decade. Even was a player coach for the A's during the teens. I think he probably played until about 1917 or 18, a game or two every year, sometimes as many as 5 or 6. But I would vote for him for one.
Was Fred Tenney there that long?
Pardon me?
Fred Tenney?
Well, Tenney for longevity, and Tenney was probably for fielding is either you could vote for either McGann or Tenney. But the problem with Tenney is he became an offensive liability. His batting averages shrunk. His batting averages shrunk every year. He didn't get on base much. Scored very, very few runs. He was playing for weak Boston teams by the middle of the decade. And that hampered him. He came over to the Giants, and McGraw thought enough of him to make him the regular first baseman in 1908. He served them most of the year, but he missed one key game.
Yes, I was just going to bring that up.
That was the Merkle game where
yes,
Merkle took over at first base to the Giants' ultimate, shock and the way the game went. But Merkle probably was nevertheless a very good first baseman. We'll be talking about him
in the next
when we get to the
next group. I did a presentation at a regional a bunch of years ago. I called it the crucifixion of Fred Merkle. And I said that because, he was playing the first game. John McGraw had, there was a similar situation 3 weeks before the game between the Pirates and the Cubs, where the Pirate runner did the same thing, and Evers protested the umpire. Hank O'Day was the same, and they disallowed it. And McGraw, who was supposedly very up on everything, was totally aware of this.
He should have been aware.
And he never took any responsibility for it. And because of the nature of the way the media covered at that point, there's only newspapers, and McGraw owned the writers. He had them in his pocket. He was never criticized for not making the team aware of what happened with Pittsburgh.
Yeah, if he did, it didn't sink in.
No, obviously.
For sure.
But I thought, and then after that, they lost 5 games after that game, and if they would have won one of them, they would have won the pennant outright. And including a couple of days after that, they lost a home doubleheader to Cincinnati, who I think was in 5th or 6th place at that point. And so, and then Harry Kowalski beat them 3 times in the
Harry
last week. So they would have won any one of those games. The whole Merkel thing would have,
Well, the whole season was very interesting because if the Pirates had won one more game, they would have been. They would have
had the same thing in the American League with Detroit winning by half a game and Cleveland in a game over the White Sox, and the American League didn't make up games that were affecting the race back then. So anyway, we got to second base, and I guess with Joey is the pretty unanimous.
Well, we have two pretty strong candidates, and depending on what you're looking for, Lajoie would get my vote certainly because he was a great overall second baseman, terrific hitter, terrific fielder, good base runner. But there was one thing he was lacking, and that was the patience at the plate. He went up there taking these hacks, rarely walked. His on-base percentage as a result was not much higher than his batting average. He did have a pretty good slugging average, and he won a lot of batting crowns. But by the middle of the decade, a little bit shading more towards 1910, another second baseman came along who took over for Lajoie in the second decade, and that was Eddie Collins of the A's.
Yeah.
Collins could do things that Collins was probably a better base stealer than Lajoie. Also a good fielder and took his walks, got on base, worked the count, scored more runs overall than Lajoie. He was on better teams too, but Lajoie was partly responsible for the quality of the teams he was on because he was a manager and he didn't always use his best lineups or judge players very well. But certainly Lajoie is number one because he played the entire decade and won a batting title in the first year of the decade and in the last year in a very controversial with Cobb. It's still up for grabs today in my estimation.
I know that, yeah.
Both
just a little tinge of scandal attached to that one,
Yeah. Definitely.
Also, one of the things I want to mention is that there's a guy, an author named Ronald T. Waldo, who's doing a book on, fabulous records that were set in the first 10 years. And one of them he put down was Lajoie's batting average in 1901. And I put down that I said, you be careful with that one because the American League didn't adopt the two-strike foul rule until 1903.
Exactly.
So that's a little, that's a little.
That gave him probably another 20 points or so.
Yeah.
More. And also the pitching in the American League. The American League went for flashier players who were either approaching stardom or who were already there. And they went for the Willie Keelers, the Jimmy Collinses, the Lajoies, Elmer Flicks. But they didn't get as many of the pitchers. But in 1902, they began corralling people like, Chesborough and another one of the Pirates, other very strong pitchers.
Yeah. But the Cy Young went over in the first year. He went over to
Cy Young went right away. Yeah.
In 1901.
He went. Yeah, and Young was probably the best overall pitcher. Although Matheson came along, a couple of years later, he was a dominant pitcher too. But I think second base is pretty well sealed up with Lajoie and Collins. Although there were some other very good second basemen. And then we come to shortstop.
That's a slam dunk.
It seems like a slam dunk with Honus Wagner.
Yeah.
Yet there was another guy who played all 10 years in the decade, who never gets much attention, and came into the decade as probably the best shortstop in the game, and played shortstop his entire career. He played a little bit of third base at the beginning, but mostly, for the most part, he was a shortstop. Where Wagner came into the decade primarily as an outfielder. He played, and there was one season, I believe it was 1899, where the Pirates were desperate for a shortstop, and they tried to about 11 guys at short during the course of the entire season. No, they weren't the Pirates. I'm sorry, they were the Louisville Colonels.
Yeah. Well, the merge had taken place in 1897. Well,
yeah,
I think 1897 was the first year that.
Well, they had a good year in '98.
Yeah, well, the
but
transfer.
'99 they were. Yeah.
'99 was when the transfer was occurred, when the consolidation was.
After the season, the transfer occurred, but they
Yeah.
were lacking a shortstop, and the one guy they had on their roster, whom they never even tried at shortstop, was Wagner. He didn't play a single game there in '99. And it wasn't until Fred Clark took over. Clark had managed him in Louisville and never saw the potential there at short. But when most of the Louisville core went to Pittsburgh the following year, because Louisville was bumped out of the National League, Wagner still was not a shortstop. He was an outfielder. Won a batting title as an outfielder. It wasn't until really about 1903 that he became a full-time shortstop. But the guy who was a full-time shortstop the entire time was Bill Dolan. Dolan was certainly not in Wagner's class as a hitter.
Yeah, he's not in the Hall of Fame, although there's been a lot of, people who feel he's belong. I think Lyle Spatz wrote a biography of him a number of years ago.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. Made a very strong case for him. And it's hard not to make a strong case for him. He played a long time, was player-manager at times. He was not a popular player, though, both with fellow players, certainly not with umpires, and with owners. He rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And so as a result, he moved from team to team. Never really, except he stayed with Chicago at the beginning of his career for about 7 or 8 years before he moved on. But once he started moving on, he ended up he played with Brooklyn, he played with Boston, he played with the Giants. He couldn't lock in anywhere because there were always.
He sort of like Hornsby as a personality, difficult personality.
Different kind of personality, but yeah. But Hornsby, because of his extraordinary hitting ability, couldn't be kept, whereas his figures were just too strong, so they overwhelmed any bad press he got. But
he went from the Cardinals
to the dumpster along with everybody else during the dead ball era.
Yeah, I know that. He went to the Hornsby went to the from the Cardinals to the Giants to the Braves to the Cubs in a 3-year period.
Yeah, and then he eventually ended up with the St. Louis Browns.
Yeah.
And Hornsby still hold. Well, we'll get to Hornsby next.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. But I'm just saying, personality-wise, that they move around a lot.
There was
obviously in those days there wasn't any free agency like there is now. But
no, there wasn't. But Dalton was a pretty rough character. Hornsby was never really a rough character. He just was. He wasn't terrible. He lacked some social graces, and he was pretty much an egomaniac. But there is some similarity between them, and there were other good shortstops too. George Davis, a carryover from 1890.
Well, they finally put him in the Hall of Fame.
It lasted the entire decade, but he was not the same player after. He had a good series with the Hitless Wonders, although he didn't play in every game. In 1906, he was with Chicago almost the entire decade. Played a couple games with the Giants.
Yeah, there was a big dispute because that was when they were trying to settle who belonged where.
Yeah,
the peace agreement.
Davis was the last guy to jump and got caught, and he was ineligible for pretty much the entire 1903 season. And after that, wasn't really quite the same player, but still had some good years and was a valuable player. But by missing the 1903 season, he missed a chance to possibly get as many as 3,000 hits if he played just a little bit longer. And as it was, he retired with the most hits by a switch hitter, and that was a record that stood for a long time. but Davis was good. Kid Elberfeld was a very good shortstop.
Bobby Wallace.
Terry Turner with Cleveland. Bobby Wallace with St. Louis was a Hall of Famer. So shortstop was a fairly deep position.
Yeah.
In the decade. But Wagner definitely towered over everyone else.
Third base, I don't know if you have any candidates other than Jimmy Collins. I guess Homer and Baker would go into the
Baker, Baker came up, he didn't play the full decade. But Baker was a strong candidate. Collins is a strong candidate. But I happen to think Collins is overrated as a player. And if he had not been player manager of the Boston team that won the first World Series in 1903, I don't think Collins would be in the Hall of Fame today. There might not be any third baseman from that era in the Hall of Fame because the two best third basemen outside of Collins for the full decade, or the better part of it anyway, in my estimation, were Bill Bradley, who jumped from the Chicago National League team to Cleveland, and Harry Steinfeld, who's a very underrated player.
The trivia question, who was the third base? The trivia question 101. I know when I was 8 years old. Third baseman to Tinker Evers and Chance.
Tinker Evers and Chance, the four infielders, I think Steinfeld was the best all-around player. And he and Bradley, I think, dominated. Collins didn't last out his career. He went downhill pretty early, still in his early 30s, and didn't do much after 1905. He played, but he was not a strong player anymore. And Bradley lasted most of the decade. Steinfeld did too. And I would credit them as being a shade above Collins. It was again a position that had a lot of scrappy guys playing it. There was Fletcher. There was Art Devlin. Art Devlin with the Giants.
Yeah,
was also very good. I would go with either Bradley or Steinfeld with giving a shade the best to Steinfeld.
Okay, now we get to the three outfielders.
We get to the three outfielders, and here we have a very interesting, conundrum to face us because I'm trying to think if there are any outfielders that. Well, I think there was one. There was one outfielder who definitely has to be on
Sam Crawford,
an all-star team. Sam Crawford, exactly. He was there all 10 years.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, came from the
all
Reds.
10 seasons were good seasons.
Yeah.
He played on 3 pennant winners with the Tigers. The only 3 pennant winners the Tigers had, while Cobb was a member of them. Cobb probably has to belong too, even though he came up in 1905 and only had 5 full seasons between 1901 and 1910, 1906 to 1910, where it's 5 seasons. There were such strong seasons that I think we have to put him in there. And Sherry McGee with the Phillies also had some good years. Delahanty only played a couple of years in 1903, he died in a tragic accident.
Yeah, but the thing with McGee, which was very, very interesting, was that he basically was there, for a number of years. Then when they finally won a pennant in 1915, he was gone.
Yeah, it happened to be.
Yeah.
He happened to be traded. Boston won the pennant in 1914.
He missed both.
So
years,
he went to Boston in 1915, and he was denied. He didn't get to be on a pennant winner, but he did get to be on one pennant winner. That was in 1919. It was last year, and he was extra outfielder.
But going back to, I think the speaker only had like 3 years in the first decade.
But it was clear that Speaker was going to emerge as
obviously,
a force. But his career was too short, I think, to put him in the group. Then we come to Willie Keeler, who ended the 19th century with the highest career batting average of any 19th century player, who had as many as, I think, 5,000 at-bats. He had a 370 career batting average going into 1901, and his average diminished every year thereafter until he retired. He just, when the foul strike rule came into existence, he fled the National League, I think principally for that reason. Went to the New York, he went to the New York.
The Highlanders.
Highlanders. And was only an average player for the rest of his career after he left. He went to Brooklyn in 1900 and 1901. And after he came to the American League, he was only an average player, never more than that. So he's no longer in the mix. There were other good outfielders. I'm trying to think. One who unfortunately kept, between holdouts and suspensions and contrary behavior
Mike
in
Donlin.
general. Mike Donlin, exactly.
Yeah.
Mike Donlin was an extremely talented player.
Yeah, I put down a couple of times on Facebook, so this guy could have been a Hall of Famer if he cared.
Yeah. But of course, there were other things in players' lives that were just as important as baseball, if not more so. In Donlin's case, he married a woman who was a stage performer, an actress, and he himself went into vaudeville and stage, and was very good. He had a second career awaiting him when he left baseball, and he made it his first career at times, and sat out entire seasons, held out, and as a result didn't compile the numbers that are necessary to even be considered for the Hall of Fame. But
what about
I think he was Hall of Fame quality.
What about Wildfire Schilt?
No, he only had a couple. He had that one big season, 1911, and other than that, he was, was never really more. He wasn't as good as Jimmy Sheckard.
Yeah, I was going to mention. Yeah,
Sheckard that really. I'm trying to think if there were Elmer Flick certainly coming into the 19th century. Looked like he was going to be a dominant player for years to come. And he was through 1906, but then he had some mysterious illness that's never really been explained fully, because he lived to be in his 90s, so it wasn't anything that was going to take him early. And after the 1906 season, Cleveland was actually offered, because Detroit sensed right away that Cobb was going to be a tremendous problem player to have on their team and very unpopular with some of his teammates. So Detroit offered him even up to Cleveland after the 1906 season for Elmer Flick. Imagine if that deal had gone through, but Cleveland turned it down. So they preferred to keep Flick. And that cost Cleveland, if nothing else, almost certainly the 1908 pennant and maybe a couple more. Very, very, very stupid. That I don't know how much input Lajoie had on that, but he probably had a fair amount, since he was the player manager and knew the players fairly well. So it was unfortunate for Cleveland to do it. That's what they refused to make that deal.
So we go with Cobb and
nevertheless
Crawford.
they had Cobb, Crawford, then they had Davy Jones.
Yeah.
And they were a strong team all the way through. They had good pitching, but no great pitchers, but very solid pitchers. And there were. I'm trying to think of some other outfielders that were in there.
Fred Clark.
Fred Clark, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Clark may even be the third outfielder if you take put Cobb, Crawford. Clark is definitely in the bidding for the third spot.
Now, speaking of the Pirates, we'll go back one step. And what do you think? What do you think of Tommy Leach as a third baseman?
Good player, good outfielder too. If he played his entire career at third base, I think he probably would be my candidate for the best third baseman in the first decade. Yeah, very good player, very underrated, had a long career. Didn't put up big numbers, but he played to win, knew how to win, played a number of positions, could play the outfield and third base equally well. And, he's a very, very underrated player. His batting average has never made it to the top echelons, but he led the league in home runs one year. And
I know.
For a guy his
size,
that
he was the first Pirate to lead the National League in home runs in the 20th century.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a very, he was very
That was
good.
one of the throwaway questions at the trivia in Pittsburgh, and nobody got that except me.
Really? No.
Yeah. I turned to Zacco and I said, Tommy Leach. He says, you're right.
You mean this year's Pittsburgh?
This year's, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Nobody got that question?
Nobody got that, no.
Oh, boy. That's,
And it's tough. This decade is tough because of the hitting, a lack of same.
Yeah. After 1903, when both leagues had the foul ball rule, hitting went down, sharply downward. The Lajoies and the Wagners and the Cobbs, of course, still maintained. But even Crawford suffered. He started hitting the low 300s, sometimes in the high 200s.
Well, he wound up going to the Coast League in a number of years after his major league career ended, and he was pretty good there too.
He did. Yeah, he still had something left when he left the Tigers. But he had a long career, very close to 3,000 hits.
Yeah, it was 2964, I believe, was the final total on him.
Sam Rice, I remember the two Sams.
Sam Rice once said that if he knew it was going to be so important, he would have hung around for it.
Yeah.
But, in those days, nobody really keep track of it.
Yeah, it meant nothing. Nothing.
And pitchers, we've got Young, we've got Mathewson, Johnson. I think Johnson and Alexander in the next decade.
Mostly the next decade, They certainly, bloomed pretty early on. But
Alexander didn't come up.
There was also Mordecai Three-Finger Brown
and Eddie Joss.
Eddie Joss, whose career was tragically shortened.
Yeah.
But in 1908, Joss had a year of the ages. And Ed Walsh won 40 games.
He burned out from that year.
He burned out, but he lasted just long enough so that he edged his way into the Hall of Fame eventually.
And you had
also won 40 games in 1904.
Yeah.
And is a Hall of Famer, but marginal one in my estimation. He had a couple of good years in there, but after that was no more than an average pitcher. But
and Bender and Plank don't come into play basically till the next decade. Yeah.
Well, actually, they came when Plank came up around 1902, I think, didn't he? Yeah, Plank. Plank was around. So and certainly I can't think of a better lefty in the early part of the 20th century. Tannehill was good. Tannehill played on 3 pennant winners in the 20th century and never played in the World Series.
Yeah, 1901 to 14.
Right.
That's the only ones that are available.
Right. And he could have been in 1903 if he stayed with the Pirates.
Yeah.
Jumped to Boston. '94, Boston won, but there was no World. McGraw and
yeah, there was a book that came out a whole bunch of years ago, which I have lying around somewhere, about 1904. It was called the year they called off the World Series. This, of course, was before 1994. And strike, and basically the thrust of it was that McGraw and Brush were so afraid of having to face the Highlanders, who lost out to Boston the last weekend of the season, that they, whatever it took, they did not want to have to meet the Highlanders in the World Series. And there was so much stink about that Brush actually wrote the rules that govern the World Series for, I don't know if it's still, they still are, but most of them are still governing the way the World Series is played.
Yeah. You can't refuse to play it now.
No.
Yeah, it's mandatory that the pennant winner play in the World Series. The only year there hasn't been one is '94.
And there was a story I read also, was that the last weekend of the season, the Highlanders were supposed to play a doubleheader at Boston at home, but they had rented the Hilltop Park to Columbia University for a football game. So they transferred the games up to Boston.
And that was when...
And that was it. I mean, that was it. And then that was when Chesbrough threw the wild pitch, even though the Highlanders had first and second in the bottom of the ninth of the game where Chesbrough threw the wild pitch. I think it was a Monday, and Patsy Doherty struck out. It was like Mighty Casey.
Yeah.
But that was the reason that the main reason that the Giants refused to play in the World Series that year is because they didn't want to face, under any circumstances, they didn't want to face the Highlanders. But the pitchers basically, I mean, you had to have Cy Young, who really didn't, the greatest thing about Cy Young was that no matter what kind of rule changes there were, and there were plenty during the time he pitched, adjusted to all of them. He may have disliked them, but he adjusted to everything.
Yeah. Yeah, he was amazing. One of a kind. Yeah, he never had a sore arm. He compiled 300-400 innings almost every year.
Yeah, he worked the farm he had in Ohio when he didn't hit the blues like a lot of them did back then.
Yeah. The guy we've forgotten about nobody can forget about him. He's indelibly etched into the game's lore, and that's Rube Waddell.
Oh, yeah.
Waddell came up in 1900. I think he led the National League in strikeouts. But even then, he still, because he was so hard to handle, he bounced around, and he went back to the minors to Los Angeles, and then he was finally picked up by Connie Mack with the Aids and blossomed into, I would have to give it to Waddell, the best left-hander, not Plank. Plank is good. But
I read where there are people now who think that he had, attention deficit disorder.
Oh, without question. Yeah.
Which, of course, was back then was unheard of.
Yeah. People just thought he was eccentric, but he was more than that. But he was all around. He was a good guy. I mean, he was a good guy. He wasn't a troublemaker, but he was just a little bit off the rails, and didn't take the best care of himself. And he died very young.
He died trying to help a fire situation. He was immersed in water.
Yeah.
He was like 31. I think it was 1914 when he passed.
Yeah.
And then Matheson came in, and Three-Fingered Brown, who
Well,
got short shrift because his career wasn't as long as the other great ones.
Yeah, McGinnity was very good too.
Yeah.
If you were to assemble a 5-man rotation, you'd have to lead off with Young, I would think, and then put Matheson. And I would probably take Mordecai Brown and Waddell, and I'm trying to.
Well, you had guys like Rulback and overall. You had guys who had good stretches, but didn't have the staying power. I mean, Rulback had he hung around, it was effective a few more years, would have been.
Well, he was actually still pretty good into the mid-teens.
I know the Pirates had guys like Philippe and and later in the decade, Kamnitz and Wheatfield and Vic Willis. Vic Willis, of course, was stuck pitching for horrible Boston teams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, Vic Willis. I would put Vic Willis in the rotation too.
Yeah, the Boston Braves were to the Giants what Kansas City A's were to the Yankees back in those days.
Yeah, they were.
Because of the Tammany Hall connections.
Yeah.
And the Braves were, they were, from 1909 to 1912, I think they lost well over 100 games all 4 years.
Yeah. So that's, yeah.
And it's funny, I mean, during that decade, the Cardinals, who turned out to be pretty much of a power ever since the 20s, were awful. They were the worst team in the National League during that whole time.
Brooklyn was bad, too.
Yeah, I also what do you think of Matt Rucker?
A good pitcher on a bad team.
Yeah.
He would put Matt Rucker with the Cubs or the A's or even Cleveland in those years, and you would have had potentially a Hall of Fame pitcher. Yeah, there were a lot of pitchers who really wasted themselves on their careers on bad teams.
A couple of pitchers, I thought Doc White may have been pretty good for a while.
Doc White
and George Mullen on the Tigers. It's probably the best out of the ones on that team.
Big years. Tigers had a lot of guys. Ed Summers, Ed Seaver. They had a lot of 20-game winners, but they weren't never could put it together for any lengthy stretch.
Yeah, and another one who I think crossed the boundaries into the next decade who was sensational for a couple of years, Jack Coombs.
Coombs was very good. Yeah, Coombs was very good. But he came up. I
think he was 1910.
That's when he started having his big year. He had the he set a record when he won. I think he won 31 games in 1910 or maybe 11.
Yeah.
You probably know that better than I, what year it was. But when he did that, he set a record for the most wins by an American League pitcher in a season without surrendering a home run.
Wow.
He was very hard to hit. He didn't have great control. He usually walked a lot of batters. But he wouldn't get that many strikeouts. But there was something about the way his ball moved, and he had a very patchy career. He really, he'd have a good season, and then he'd either be hurt or something would happen the next season. So as a result, he doesn't get the credit he deserves for the great seasons he had.
How much effect did you think the fact that they essentially used a couple of baseballs a game, and the fact that they had all these trick pitches that wound up being outlawed in 1920 had an effect on some of these pitchers' successes and some of the lack of hitting during that time.
Well, it had a great using one. It was a game as late as 1908, I believe. In Brooklyn, I think it was Brooklyn and St. Louis, where they used only one ball for the entire game. And that's not necessarily the latest that one was used, but it definitely shows that, as late as 1908, they really got along with one ball if they could.
Spitballs and shine balls and emery balls and whatever else.
Shine balls, emery balls, licorice balls.
Yeah.
You could do anything, almost anything you wanted, as long as you didn't actually mangle the ball.
Yeah.
In such a way that it had to be taken out of play. But Walsh was a spitballer. There were other good spitballers. But it took it out of it. Walsh pitched so many innings in his younger years that he just...
I don't think 464 is going to be approached anytime soon.
No. And they really overused him. And pitchers in those days, they allowed themselves to be. They really didn't have much choice. I mean, Fielder Jones pitched Walsh unmercifully often, and but Matheson had in McGraw a manager who saved Matheson for big games. Yeah. And wouldn't overuse him, and had guys like Hook Wilsey and Brett Ames.
They had secondary pitchers that were good to roll.
He had always had the deepest pitching staffs. And the A's probably had the second deepest. They always had 2 or 3 20-game winners.
Yeah.
But,
well, obviously, if you're taking managers from that time period, I don't know if you throw Frank Chance into the mix of Huey Jennings, but the managers from that time generally are considered to be McGraw and Mack. Yeah.
Well, I would take Chance. Yeah, I would take Chance because McGraw did make a mistake.
Yeah, well, in 1908.
And I think there were other pennants he could have won too. And I think McGraw was part of the decision not to play the Highlanders, in the possibility of playing the Highlanders in 1904.
Yeah.
And Mack, I don't know what to make of Mack. And I give him the.
Well, he'll get more in the next decade when they won, all those pennants.
Yeah, he will.
Before he turned them into some of the worst teams ever played ball.
With Mack, I don't. I really don't like. I've had arguments about Mack for
the Norman Mock.
Yeah, Norman Mock and several other people. Yeah.
Well, Norman Mock wrote the huge 3-volume
the bio of Mack.
Volume biography.
And Mack and Norman really couldn't explain either why Mack allowed such terrible teams to take the field for years at a time. There was no excuse for it. I mean, Mack soured on the team.
Yeah.
In 1914, there was actually talk that they threw the series, and he soured on the team after they lost the 1905 series. And Waddell didn't even pitch, got hurt before the series, or so it was said.
Well, the one latest thing that said basically that a number of them were planning to jump to the feds.
Yeah.
After 1914, so
Plank jumped, and
but we can get into that next time around.
Queens jumped too.
Yeah, we can get into that the next time around.
And Baker sat out the 15.
Yeah, because of the contract.
Yeah, and then became, never played for the A's again.
Yeah, well, look, Eddie Collins carried
his contract. I think Collins pushed and engineered that trade.
He came up with a very fat contract when he went to the White Sox, of course, and that made the rest of them all sorts of thrilled. And that was also a possibly leading reason for the scandal. But we can get into that whole thing next time.
Yeah, we will. So we talk about who the best owner was in the first decade.
Good. Barney Dreyfus.
I think he was. Yeah.
Yeah.
His teams were always in contention.
Yeah.
He was a hands-on owner.
Yeah.
He stuck with Clark. Pirates with a break or two would have had 4 or 5 pennants instead of just 3.
Yeah.
In the decade.
Well, actually, I had 4.
I go with Dreyfus.
I had 4, 1, 2, 3, and 9.
Yeah.
Excuse me,
Right.
yeah.
1, 2, 3, and 9. Well, they could have had 5 if they'd wanted.
Yeah.
And
But
all
such is life.
And they were good every season, just not quite good enough. I mean.
Yeah, and then in the next decade, you got the building of all the what they call the classic ballparks. So that also was a factor in the way things happen. Okay.
It was.
I think we did a very good job on this.
It's been good.
It's been good, and hopefully in the next week or two we'll do the teens.
Great.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope the audience who listens to this gets something out of it. I know I did. And I want to thank you again, David, for your encyclopedic knowledge of this era.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite eras.
Okay, say hello to Marilyn.
I will. Thanks.
Okay, and we'll talk soon.
Good.
Right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
I am back. You're comfortably zoned with me, the Zigzag Man, Alameda, California, right across the bridge from, the moat from Oakland, and across the bay from San Francisco. I'm lucky today. I've got a return guest, anybody who's interesting enough to return to this show, wants to, and is interesting enough to. It's a rare combination. But I'd like to welcome back Mitchell Belacone from Argentina. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fine. How about yourself?
Was that a good pronunciation of your last name?
Belacone.
Okay, Belacone.
Yeah.
Next, you want to start all over again?
But I'm fine. You changed me from Italian to Jewish by knocking out the T.
We don't try to convert around here, but if it happens, it happens.
That's all right.
All right. I wouldn't want to change that Italian attitude, though, that New York attitude. And I didn't say this when you talked about your book last time about Joe Willie Namath, a hero of mine as well when I grew up in the same city you did. And there was nothing like Broadway Joe. Why don't you give me some memories of him as a kid growing up, what you thought of him, and what he meant to you?
Well, as I said, I loved playing touch football as a kid and even getting into tackle football games in the park. He was the natural idol, and they built him up pretty good with a whole Broadway Joe image that was created by, from what I've read, Sonny Weberlin, who was the general manager. And he decided to make him Broadway Joe and dressed him up a little bit because really he was from a little bit of the countryside in Pennsylvania. But no, he had a laser arm, and he won games. At that age, you're so impressionable. And
right, and he had great receivers to throw to. He had Maynard and Sauer.
Lamons was a tight end.
P.D. Lamons was so underrated and so terrific in that 68-69 championship team that beat Baltimore with Calamini, and that was just a terrific year. And it was by far the most important year in New York sports history because it wasn't just the Jets, it was the Mets, and it was the
Knicks.
The Knicks with Willis Reed. Oh my God! What a year!
What a year!
It was in a year where the country needed the diversion of sports more than anything. 68, you had Vietnam going on. You had the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. it was so needed for the country and expressed its importance, how it could take people's minds off the real world. Still going on today, and I have to admit, as big a sports fan as I am glued to CNN these last few days. I'm amazed by the theater we're getting, and there's a certain amount of realness to it because the son of a bitch could blow us all up. He's deranged, and you couldn't write a novel like that because it wouldn't be. You could write it, but you couldn't get it published because they'd say it's too absurd. And
well, that's the cliche that fiction is it's stranger. How does that saying go?
Truth is stranger than fiction.
Yeah, just like you said, you couldn't create that.
Yeah, and but it's coming at him on so many different levels, and just anxious to see what brings him down. If it's and who wrote the anonymous op-ed piece in the Times? That's curious about that. What's going to happen?
The new deep throat.
Right.
That'll stay a mystery for a while.
It may not stay a mystery for that long because now he's got the Attorney General working. We're talking. This is yesterday when you're hearing this. So it's going to be Sunday the 8th. We're recording on the 7th because things change so drastically from moment to moment.
Wild time.
Say, well, the breaking news, what's the breaking news going to be? It's crazy times. It's interesting. I've never been engrossed in television like this since the O.J. trial.
No, it's wild. And I've been watching myself. Two quick things. Just to finish off on Joe Namath and the years you spoke of, and I'll get right back to Trump.
Oh, you talk about whatever you want to go.
No. I'll follow your lead. You're quarterbacking here. I've been using that year where the three teams won to rationalize all my suffering since. I do it by saying, well, I appreciated the wins as a teenager more than I would now. It really meant something to me back then. So that's how I appease myself when somebody in their team is winning. Anyhow, getting right back to Trump.
Yes, that's very true. With the Jets especially.
Right.
And the Knicks for that matter. But not with the Mets. I can't find myself doing that. I'm so engrossed in that day-to-day service and craziness and all of it.
Here's my feelings on Trump. I'm in a little business group down here. I don't know why. I just sometimes to hear people's opinions. There's one guy that writes for a local paper, and he's got the good dirt because things change around here. Politics are always crazy here, and they change quickly. So this is a good source for getting news that I might not get in the paper. But anyhow, this is what they were talking. We have a group email, and they were talking about the Trump's op-ed in the Times, and this is what I wrote. I hope they bring him down as clean as possible. I grew up in New York City reading about this sanctimonious skinflint on an almost weekly basis. He was a compulsive liar then as he is now. Senior draft-dodging, Chapter 11ing, ranted then as he does now. He was a soulless deadbeat, stiffing and conning all kinds of contractors and customers. I pray the article is telling the truth more for the protection of the country than to protect the fouled reputation of both the liberal and conservative press. I have no affiliation with either political party. I lean towards the conservative line at least as much as I do the liberal line. That being said, we elected an unqualified buffoon to run the country. Why our country should be trusted by anyone after that is beyond me. And then I go, do I hear a Hillary this or a Hillary that? Because whenever you knock the guy, the only response, whenever you throw facts about him, the only response I ever get out of group, well, Hillary this and Hillary that. That was my thought on Trump.
And the same holds true for the other side. Even in the campaign, the best they could say about each other, the best they could say about their own well-doing is the bad that the other party is doing. Hillary would do that, and Trump would do that as well. So it is a joke from that standpoint. But he goes overboard. He's not just conservative. He's not just middle. He makes us think that that Nixon was not all that bad a guy.
When you look at it from that perspective, no, he was a great guy. Bring him back.
From that perspective.
If you're going to look at it from that angle.
We've come to that. We've come to the fact that we're still not asking for Cheney and Bush to be tried for war crimes. When does the statute of limitation run out? Nobody's talking about that anymore. It's talking about that this guy is totally unhinged, off the hook. But you know what? It's the Republican Party's obligation, the Ryans and the Pences and these people, they have to step in. They have to say enough's enough.
At some point, they're going to have to do it. They just have to.
Yeah, you got the midterm elections are coming up. They're going to be slaughtered, and so why would the individuals not disassociate themselves, which means the Republican Party and Total, from the cuckoo and go after them and get them on Amendment 25, whatever it is, which was Joe Pepitone's number. How bad is that?
Bringing sports right back into it.
I have to. Sports is a microcosm of life. But on the other hand, life is a microcosm of sports. So I'm tearing myself apart 24 hours a day. But not really. I nap a lot in between. And I snack a lot. Anyway,
have you ever heard
turning out? I just want to know how you see it turning out.
I'm scared the way politics works that this guy might survive the 4 years. As he controls a lot of, the Republicans are in a position of power now. They've already proven that they're going to defend him to the end. I'm just waiting for. I believe he's going to have to do something even more egregious before they really turn on him and
like
and
fire Sessions.
I don't know. It's amazing with what he's done. They still don't say enough is enough. We've got to do something. So I don't know what it would take. I mean, putting him in an insane asylum.
Yeah, very interesting. Like I say, it's good theater. We don't know what's going to happen. Here's the downside. He could piss off the wrong people and blow us all up because he's dealing with an international crowd, and he's not a diplomatic person to begin with, and he has no ideas how to keep NATO alive and how to keep his allies in his back pocket. And there's no president that hasn't appeased his allies to keep it going. That's why I say he's coming down. I think it's going to be an inside job to get him, which means something like the 25th Amendment type thing, where they're going to come to him and they're going to say, Captain Queeg, we found the strawberries. Don't worry about that. We're just going to give you a rest. Be a little injection so it won't hurt. The pain of all this won't hurt. You won't be disgraced. Melania's, she's already been deported we had your whole family deported between then, just to show you that what you do isn't right. But that's my dream, how it's going to end. We'll see.
We'll see. Did you ever hear the quote from H.L. Mencken, who he was an editor and a writer, and he lived from 1880 to 1956. I know this detail because
I remember that.
Right. He had a quote: "As democracy is perfected, the office of the president represents more and more closely the inner soul of the people. On some great and glorious day, the plain folks of the land will reach their heart's desire at last, and the White House will be adorned by a downright moron."
Whoa.
He called it. I don't know what year the quote was, but he nailed it. Meanwhile, Mencken was a major racist and anti-Semite, and I've read some of his stuff. Pardon me?
I did not know that.
Yeah, no, I'm not just calling it. It was really blatant stuff that he said, ferocious stuff. And I'm a fan of Theodore Dreiser, and he knocked him as a writer who was so far heads and shoulders above Mencken. He made fun of his grammar, like that has anything to do with it. So.
Very interesting. I had no idea about the anti-Semite thing. I'm generally aware of those who exhibit anti-Semitic characteristics, and it's most everybody, even the Jews.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's what I've called when I make comments about the Jews, and I've been accused of being a self-loathing Jew by saying that. I said I'm not a self-loathing Jew. I'm a Jew-loathing Jew. I'm fine with me. If I have a particular problem with another Jewish person, I just loathe that Jew. I'm not allowed to do it.
It's a great sketch on Curb Your Enthusiasm where Larry David is humming a Wagner tune or whistling it, and he's confronted by another Jew, and he says, the Jew says,
I didn't see it.
"You're a self-hating Jew. You hate yourself." And Larry David says, "Oh, make no mistake, I hate myself, all right, but it's not because I'm a Jew." Larry David is great. If you haven't been introduced to him, of course you have through Seinfeld, but the Curb Your Enthusiasm show is a different level. It's a cable TV type thing, and it brings out a new side to humor that is incredible. This guy is funny as fuck. That's just
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's just my opinion.
It's a funny thing. I use a lot of these guys for motivation. When you're writing and you don't have much success or practically any at all, and you see guys that like Larry David. You hear their stories, and he was ready to quit after a year. They was being run by executives, and he was ready to walk, and then I guess something changed where he hung on. But this whole thing might have gone off the air. Supposedly, if Seinfeld had come on in the modern day, never would have made it because its ratings weren't strong enough early on, and they can it a lot quicker these days. So
and even when it did start going well, both of them, Seinfeld and Larry David, didn't really believe it was going to go anywhere. It was doing moderately well for 4 or 5 years, and all of a sudden it just took off. It was terrific. But Curb Your Enthusiasm is a whole new brand of television that makes you laugh in a different way. Cable TV is terrific in the sense that it freed everybody up from network restrictions, and you got to love that, just as podcast radio does. No joke.
I have one semi-personal Seinfeld story.
Okay.
I was living on 82nd Street between Central Park West and Columbus. That was my last apartment in New York. And previously I had lived in Charleston, South Carolina, and I had a female friend that was coming up to visit. And she was asking me, look, are there any celebrities in your neighborhood? And already it sent a chill down my spine because they were all over the place. The Beresford was at the corner, which is a building that housed Seinfeld, McEnroe, just a whole bunch of them. Anyhow, at the bakery on 81st Street in Columbus, there was a hangout. Nobody hassled them. Maybe a tourist would come in and bother them, but it just didn't happen. So I was like telling her, look, if you see any of these people, we really can't go ask for an autograph or anything. It's out of place, blah blah blah. So this was over the phone. She comes up to the apartment. She has to run down the street to the pharmacy. She's not a quarter of the way down the block, and she sees Spot Seinfeld tying his shoe on the stoop of a brownstone. So the story goes, she starts waving her hands and goes, oh my God, what am I going to do when I tell my friends that I saw Seinfeld tying his shoe? So Seinfeld retorts, well, what am I going to do when I tell my friends I saw whoever you are? So that little story, this was the days before cheap phone calls. That little story cost me probably $30 or $40 in long distance. The minute she got back, every friend, enemy, whoever she had in her phone book heard a version of that story. It was like, well, then I knew not to go to the bakery with her anyhow.
Right.
So that's my personal Seinfeld story. He cost me money.
Yeah. And I remember those days when it cost a ton to talk on the phone. I was living in California. My friends were all in New York. And the phone bill was my major expense. It was rent and the phone bill. And glad those days have changed. Life is better in a lot of ways. It's worse in a lot of ways.
Agreed 100%. The technology is by no means the answer. I was trying to get through to Bank of America on a closed account, and my digits were closed, and you can't get a live voice, and you have to punch in a code that I didn't have to get a live voice for security reasons. So I found myself screaming into the telephone at a computer, and I thought to myself, it took me 40 minutes to finally find my way to a live voice. And I thought to myself, how far have we really advanced that I have to go through this torture session? That were not only me, anybody else has to deal with all these recordings and weave your way through. I'm not sure it's an advancement. It's less personal. It's more time consuming. And
where it's an advancement is you can pick up knowledge so much quicker. There are those moments, and we all have them, that are terribly infuriating. You're on vacation. The credit card is stopped because they see weird charges. Well, the weird charges are your charges, and you told them about it weeks before the vacation, and they still stop your credit card. That sort of thing. Everybody has stories, but it's offset by the quick way we can pick up knowledge and get up to date on not only scores of baseball games, happenings around the world, the stock market, latest news. Everything we want is at our fingertip, or Google this, Google that. That's a tremendous advantage.
I agree. I wasn't going to get a smartphone. Going back to, I guess, iPhone 3 time. I said, what do I need it for? I went to dinner at a boyhood friend's house who was living in Washington. We were having an argument, but there was a discrepancy on some subject. He pulled out his phone, Googled the answer, and I said, that's it. Went home, I bought the smartphone. I don't know how arguments got settled before the Internet.
They didn't. They came to fisticuffs many times.
Well, then again, you understand that you can read it in as fact in the encyclopedia, but according to Giuliani, it might not be fact. What was his line?
According to Clinton, is what it is, or it isn't what it is, or depends what the meaning of is. That's what he said. So we got occasional lies from our politicians, not even occasional, frequent lies from our politicians, but not 7 a day on the average like we're getting now.
No, it's insanity. It really does offend the little intelligence I have left. But, I look at this guy, I don't get mad at him. I get mad at us. How did we all get so stupid? I didn't think Hillary was a great alternative, but still, I mean, how do you elect someone like this? He wasn't even a great businessman. From what I understand, with all his nonsense, if he had left his father's money in a savings account, he'd probably be doing better than he is today financially.
That's funny. That is very funny. As far as we know, because his tax records have never been released. So that's something else to think about. But remember Socrates, the name Socrates? He was most famous for saying that the elected official, and this goes back to what Mencken was talking about, is no more than a representation of the society that elects him. Well, who elected this guy, and what caused them to elect him? You mentioned Hillary was no great shakes. She shouldn't have even been the candidate. Bernie was the candidate. He was on his way until they...
Inside job.
Inside job. Deborah Wasserman Schultz took him out of it and disgruntled a lot of Democrats who have always said you can't fight Republicans. They haven't said it so much as a lot of people have said. You can't fight the evils of republicanism with Democrats because, number one, until the last 2 days, they've shown no moxie. 6 people in the congressional hearings to approve Kefauver, or whatever his name is.
Kavanaugh
Kavanaugh, as much as put their lives, their political lives on the line by releasing confidential information. Well, they did it, and I think it's the first step in showing the world that they're not going to take it. They're not going to approve this guy. They're not without a fight. And they're not going to stand by and see the president kill the nation. It's going to become bipartisan to get him out of there. People are going to start crossing the lines, the political lines, the aisle, if you will, and it's going to happen. And I say it's going to happen within a week, because he's demanding now that his attorney general use his power to go after something that isn't a crime. That isn't
the free press. That's their right.
It's First Amendment right of
unless a judge orders it for I don't know the legal reasons, but it's rare that it happens. I know in murder cases sometimes a journalist can't hold that information back, but in something like this, I don't see why they shouldn't protect their source.
Yeah, well, hey, and in my case, I don't see why they shouldn't protect the South. So everybody needs protection at one time or another. Hey,
I'm glad. Yeah, go ahead. I just what you said. Politicians crossing party lines. That's what I want to see. I don't want to see it look like it was an onslaught from the Democrats because there's enough polarization between the two parties anyhow. I mean, it seems to be getting worse every year. I mean, so if the Republicans would finally turn on them and realize it's too big a danger to their own lives and their children's lives, that'd be the best thing, to bring them down from inside.
My feeling is he's as polarized, Trump is, from the traditional Republican Party as the Republican Party, traditional Republican Party, is polarized from the Democratic Party. It's almost like there are three levels of craziness, or two levels of craziness and one level of sanity. And the history of the Democratic Party, it was Harry Truman was a Democrat when he took care of Hiroshima. So all kinds of things go through our minds. Hey, listen, Mitchell, thank you very much for giving me a great segment and making me think that my thinking is somewhat online with someone who I think is more sane than me. How about that?
You might be mistaken there. I think
and it's not like I haven't been mistaken in the past about a number of things, a number of times. So I'm open to correction, but I'm just going with my first impressions. You got it together pretty well, my friend.
Well, I try.
Okay, keep trying. That's all we can do. And I'm going to check in with you from time to time on a very regular basis, and we'll chat like this. And you're an additive to the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network.
Muchísimas gracias, and it's a pleasure from this side also. Keep up the good work.
Feel good. And you the same, my friend. Be well.
All right. Nice to speak to you.
We'll be back soon. Adios, everybody. Thanks for listening. Get those books together for the Head Start program for the kids. Lightly used, new, however you want to get them together. Bring books to kids. Get them reading. Get their imaginations going. Get their noses out of the devices and what have you. Have them get a passion, and by all means, it wouldn't hurt to get kids school ready that need school readiness the most. So do that for me. It'd be great. We got some more segments coming up. Please enjoy. I have Melodye Montgomery, who is a fellow cannabis activist and a returnee, as was Mitchell. And you're going to hear her in a moment, so stand by. Be well, everybody. Adios.
Montgomery.
Hi, how you doing?
Oh, good. Welcome back to Comfortably Zoned. I am the Zigzag Man, and you're in Alameda, California. And I've got a return guest who is what I call a maven, a cannabis maven. Is that, that's understating it, isn't it, Melody?
That'll work for me.
Okay, good deal. Welcome back. Every now and again, I like to touch bases with you to see what you're up to see the results of Proposition 64 in California, and to talk about a project that you have going to be what you call branded. And so first bring us up to date. I'll ask this question to get you into it. What are you happy about as the results of 64? Maybe some pleasant surprises that you didn't know would happen. And what are you majorly disappointed about in Proposition 64?
I struggle to find a happy in 64 right now.
Okay. Would you
maybe
elaborate?
As we talk about it, I will find a happy point there.
Okay. Sometimes it takes a little talking to get into a happy point. Well, first of all, they legalized it recreationally, and that was a long time coming. A good friend of mine, Ryan Miller, once said, it shouldn't have been an issue in the first place. All cannabis at this point should have been legal a long time ago. All of it is medicinal, and this entire thing has been political along the way, and it's ended up hurting them. What do you say about that?
I agree.
Okay.
I totally agree. The legalization was supposed to bring tons of tax dollars to the state of California. And what it's done basically is driven a greater, larger, thriving black market.
Okay.
And the underground is thriving right now. The taxes are incredibly high in most areas. Sometimes you can be paying up to 35% tax. I've heard that there's bigger taxes in other areas, but 35% tax is a chunk.
Absolutely a chunk. That's
when you pay that much, that drives people to go back to their local grower, their buddy down the street, their friends. It's driving a whole new sesh market where people can actually go in, talk to the vendors, speak directly to the growers, and cut out all the taxes and all the middlemen, and get their medicine or their cannabis if they're just legal smokers at a really, really good price.
Taxes notwithstanding, what has the legalization of recreational cannabis done to the medical cannabis industry? How has product gotten to the shelves, if at all? And how are the clubs that were medical clubs like Harborside adjusting? Are they all recreational clubs now? Are there two parts to the club? Do you have to have an ID to get in one part of the club? How is that working out?
Okay. Well, some of the clubs have decided just to go adult use.
Okay.
So in the case of Harborside, they're not serving medical patients anymore.
Really? Oh, I didn't know that.
You won't get any kind of medical discounts off your taxes or anything else by carrying a medical recommendation at Harborside. They're just dealing with adult use only. So you just need to be over 21 and have your ID to get into Harborside and buy some cannabis.
Wow.
But they've totally stopped serving the medical patient. I understand that on the day that happened, that 64 passed, and we actually put it into action here in California, that they had a huge line outside, and some of those were medical patients and waited in line for an hour or so to get in because they wanted to be there on the first day of legalization, and then found out that they had to pay all those taxes. It didn't matter whether they were a patient or not. So they weren't happy about that. Okay. Now, other places like Magnolia have decided to serve both the adult use and the medical patient.
Okay. Now, how do they work that at the door? Do you go?
So when you come in, you still have in your you go to the same counter to check in, same desk. You give your ID, and they if you are a patient, you automatically, when you go in, you will give your rec as well. So they keep that on the record. Mm-hmm. So when I go in there today, I'll just give them my ID, and they will scan it, and they'll put me up in the database and see that I'm a patient. If I want to buy something there today, then they'll give me a number, and I'll go stand in line and buy something.
Okay. Do you notice some of the products that you used to buy as a medical user are not available and either as a recreational user or even as a medical user anymore. I've heard that things have been taken off the shelf.
Things are being taken off the shelf. Yes, a lot of that has to do with the testing, the total extremities of our testing levels that we're requiring for cannabis in California.
Mm-hmm.
It's ridiculous. You have to pass a higher testing level with cannabis than you do with tomatoes.
Now,
so I could go out.
Could an argument be made that on behalf of the consumer, that's a good thing?
I'm not so sure. If you can go to the farmer's market here in Alameda on Tuesday and Saturdays and buy tomatoes and fruit that's never gone through any kind of testing process.
But is it a good thing that the weed is going through a testing process?
We want it through a testing process, but I think that they have the standards set so ridiculously high that you would actually have to be growing cannabis almost in a sanitary situation with no dirt.
Right.
Come out with an absolute clean product they're wanting. I mean, you have leads and you have metals that are in the soil, and the testing is a good thing. Don't get me wrong. Testing is good. We don't want to be smoking pesticides or having edibles that have mold or mildew or pesticides in them. Don't get me wrong. I'm all about, yes, we want to test.
Okay.
Test levels need to be set in some kind of standard that makes sense. For example, my parent company was having problems with the new testing because testing for topicals is put in the same category as testing for an edible or a concentrate. So when they test for parts per million of a butane or alcohol, there's a level that you have to be under. Mm-hmm. That makes you're going to eat it or if you're going to smoke it. But if you're going to rub it on your body, we've been using cannabis to make liniments and many other herbs to make liniments with alcohol for hundreds of years. It doesn't make any sense that you can walk into the store at Safeway and buy witch hazel or 70 or 80% alcohol off the shelf, but to use on your body, but yet you can't have that same product in a cannabis product that's a topical for your body.
Now, what can be done as an activist, I ask myself, who would you protest to? How would change go about? Peaceful change, of course. How would that be instigated?
Well, I think it's all about commenting when the state puts up the new laws, when the BCC puts up new regulations, they give an amount of time for public comment.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody as an activist has to stay on it. We can't just say, okay, we legalized it, we're done. No, it was a really poorly written law, and we have to continue to work to write that law and make it so that it actually gives us access to cannabis. I've seen many dispensaries that their products were maybe a quarter, 25% of what they usually have on their shelf, and that's because of a few things in my eyes. The regulations are so strict that it makes it hard for farmers to actually even continue to grow their flower. And everything is based on the flower. You can't have any edibles, you can't have any concentrates, you can't have anything until you have some nice flower. And when
that's right. It's all made what comes off of that flower. Yeah, that's absolutely first. You can't make keef. I mean, nothing comes, and that's put very succinctly. Thank you for that. The flower is what it's about.
Yeah. So if we're testing the flower and taxing the flower at such an extreme rate that it makes it hard for the grower, the actual farmer, to produce flower that can get into production,
Mm-hmm.
well, then you're going to have that backlash that rolls down the list. If I can't get flour that in a decent quantity to do extractions with, then I can't make the product. And this is what's happening with everybody right now. So there's between that, the lack of ability of flour and product that's been tested and will pass these extreme tests, and the rules, like such regulations about how many milligrams that edibles can have in them or not have in them. We used to be able to get 100 milligram edibles for anybody could get them when I was a patient. And now there's strict rules about 10 milligrams per serving. The packaging is crazy. It puts some strict regulations about child-proofing packages that shouldn't have to be child-proof.
Right.
There are things in your house every day that you don't want your children to have, but they're not making you carry them out of the store in double, triple safety packages.
Right, as if that they don't make you do that with the horrible stuff they sell you in a regular supermarket to
or a liquor
from
store. You
kids.
can walk out of a liquor store and with a plain paper bag and a bottle of alcohol. Why does a bottle of weed have to be in a childproof bag and then in a childproof container to begin with, and then another childproof bag on top of that to walk out the door?
Very good question. You've had a few moments to think about it. Give me some positives that have come out. If you'd like me to start, I will. I think legalization has given permission to some folks who never would have tried it if it weren't, even if it were medically legal and not recreationally. They never would have tried it. People don't want to be scofflaws. I pride myself in being a scofflaw around cannabis, and have for 40 some odd years. And I could understand it with folks. They just don't want to break the law. But now I have run into people, especially at the East Bay Canna community, who are being educated by folks like yourself as to the joys, the different ways of ingesting, and just to say nothing of a community that is provided. So from that standpoint, we're bringing people in that never would have considered it before. I consider that to be a positive right there.
You're right. That's a very good point. It's quite a good battle point now when people have something bad to say about cannabis, and you can say, well, the state of California disagrees with you.
Right, exactly.
Decided state to legalize it, which means, people. It's time for people to start moving and getting ready and getting used to it. I know we're battling that a lot in here on our beautiful island of Alameda, where I've heard so many public comments during this last couple of years as we were trying to lift the ban about the smell of cannabis and the smell being offensive.
Offensive to who?
Exactly. That's what I said, Ralph. I asked that at the city council meeting because they wrote it into the law that you cannot smoke cannabis in your apartments or in specific places because they attached it to the cigarette cancer thing, and the smell is offensive. And I asked specifically, offensive to who? And I turned around and I asked the crowd, is it offensive to anybody in here? And of course, we're all cannabis smokers, so no, it's subjective. Our society has been taught for so many years that when you smell that, that's a bad thing. That's bad people doing bad things.
Or people who are just looking to be contrary. In other words, they, for whatever reason, they believe that it's the hippie evil power, this kind of thing, and they're just not going to give up on it. It's like being a Trumpite. You could be proved that the guy is just what he is, and you won't miss a beat because you say, well, look at the economy, how good the economy is. The idea is they're taking kids and separating them from their parents. And if it doesn't outweigh the goodness of the economy, this, that, and the other thing, as an American, how you feel about the people who are making laws and the spirit of the country. We were a melting pot, and now we're taking it to the point where we're losing what was the best part of our country, is that the people coming together. I grew up in New York, and there's like 40 different dialects spoken in schools in New York. And it's beautiful. Why can't we embrace what we learn, take in the music from other cultures, take in their hash? How about that?
Yes.
Look at what's happening. Why can't we have hash at a regular price, for crying out loud? Let these
crying
people
out
in.
loud. $65 for a gram of hash. Come on, Ralph.
Yes, and you wonder why people are going underground or going back to being underground. And I must say that the old time, we're both old time OGs, and the old time folks like ourselves we're pushing out the growers that we were our friends, our partners for over the years, who can't afford to meet the regulations of legalization. Now, you yourself have a product that you're trying to do it legally. You're trying to do it the right way. What does that entail? Tell us. If I were bright enough to come up with something like yourself, that not come up with yourself, but come up with an idea like you did, that is terrific, that is salable. Boy, you've gone through some red tape to get this thing going. Tell us about how you started and the red tape you've gone through to keep it the way it is.
Yeah, it's been a long process. I am truly blessed because my partners are external, and they have a thriving, growing topical business before I even started doing what I'm doing.
Okay.
So when I started doing my product and I started doing the formulation, when I came across a little hitch, I went to them because we've been friends for a long time, and I trust in their product. And he invited me to come to their lab and work with their lab guy, who I spent 10 minutes with, and we fixed my problem.
Whoa,
and they offered to white label for me. So I'm going to be honest and tell you, I have not had to fight the same battle that other small and mom and pop type of shops are battling right now with having to have enough money to get an actual space, because getting a license is not the main or the hardest part. I think that the hardest part is coming up with the financing. You have to have the money to put in the application process. You have to have the money to, say, lease a space for 6 to 12 months out front, or at least have some kind of viability to be able to stay in that spot.
Okay.
And the type of places that they're requiring and the security that they're requiring around that can be so expensive that you can have the most intelligent and the greatest idea out there, but if you don't have the financial backing, it's really hard. We have a lot of folks that have gone through the Hood Incubator program in Oakland that was created to bring people out of the underground into the legal cannabis market, teach them how to do it, teach them how to put in the applications for licenses, et cetera. And one of the main problems that they're coming up against is, yes, they have all the knowledge, they know how to do this business, they know how to work it, but unless you have possibly, it could be anywhere from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars to actually do a legal business. That makes it really hard for a lot of people.
Okay.
And I'm going to be
not just the money, the know-how.
Yes, especially people of color who by the way things are going on in our society, have smaller access and less chance to access that large financial system.
Okay.
So it's really a blowback. I've seen a lot of smaller cannabis delivery businesses go under because of the rules and regulations that needs to be attached to a storefront. And yeah, I just think that we over-regulated something that was doing fine to begin with. And maybe we should have written the regulation around the process that we already had moving and going in place, as opposed to write a regulation and then make your whole industry bend and fold and mutilate to fit into that little square box over there.
Okay. What is the one thing that you would recommend for change in all of this if you had the power?
Oh, that's a good one. I don't know if it would start with testing, if it would start with lowering taxes, if it would really start with addressing the outrageous testing platforms that we have going on, whether it would start with community access to the medicine and to the legal world. I'm not sure. There's so many things that I feel are wrong with it. I'm not sure where I would start.
Okay. Think about it for a while I wish you a happy birthday.
Thank you.
All right. We don't all get to have birthdays anymore. And part of it is survival. And what do you attribute your survival powers to? What or whom in your life?
Oh, that's a good one. I have a wonderful support system.
Okay.
My daughter and my son, although they're both adults, neither one of them smoke weed. Neither one. I raised 2 kids, neither one smoked cannabis.
I raised a guy who doesn't smoke either.
I can't figure that out yet, but okay. They're still good kids. I still love them.
Right.
But they support me in what I do, and they're very proud of what I do. My husband is my right hand, and he's always got my back. My friends love me, and this huge community supports me and just keeps me going forward and making me know that every day that I go out and I do something, there's a reason that I'm doing that, because there's a patient back there who really needs that.
Oh, what an attitude. Melodye, thank you. Thanks for keep coming back and giving us updates, and you make me feel good. Thank you, Melodye.
Thank you. You make me feel good, too.
All right. We'll talk again really soon. It's the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I am Ralph Tyko, the weak link of it all. My guest this is CannaChat, an official segment of CannaChat, and my recurring guest is Melodye Montgomery. Thanks, my dear.
Thank you. Have a great day.
All right. Adios, everybody. We'll be back really soon. Bye.
This has been a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.